Powerlifting. Derek Willis, our newest member of the team. He's the powerlifting director. He'll be the venue lead at Fall Sports Festival for the sport of powerlifting. And then Mike Starnowski, the vice president of sports, who will be going over the return to activity portion of our section tonight. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded just so we can distribute it later on. Please hold your questions until the end just so we can get through all the content in a timely manner. I believe we will have plenty of time tonight. So if you need to, put your question in chat and we will address it as soon as it's appropriate. So tonight we're going to start off with the updated COVID protocol, some new news there, some introductions about who's on the sport management team, deadlines as we typically do before each season, information regarding qualifying for the state championship and what needs to be completed in advance there, talking about upcoming qualifiers if there are any, details regarding the coaches training and what we're planning at the moment, some rules and updates reminders. There is no new rules for the past couple of years, but we will go over some that tend to be forgotten about, follow up with a question and answers at the end. And at the very end of the PowerPoint, for your reference later on, there is a forms and paperwork area that you can refer back to if you have any questions about protests, those forms, incident reports, etc.
Okay. Hi, folks. First, thank you very much for committing and being prepared to help train your athletes for powerlifting for this season. I know it's been a rough 16 months or so as it is right now, and we're very happy that our protocols have changed a bit. As more information has been available and conditions have changed, and we'll go through them here. You may have heard about them from your area director. These changes in protocol have been developed or adjusted based on our continued movement towards having more opportunities to return to play or to return to training and competition. As with anything in this kind of a situation, and with, as things can change as we move on, there is always a possibility that we may be shifting our categories. There's new categories of the return to activity protocol. But there is a possibility we may have to suspend programming, but the new protocol is such that that should be a really remote possibility, and would have to, I'm not sure that we would actually even get to that in any kind of the situations that's realistically on the horizon. We're basing it off of, or the changes in levels within it is based off of a couple different statistics, both the number of new cases per 100,000, and when it comes to that, as well as when it comes to the second metric, we're looking at the entire state of Maryland. So with this setup, we're not looking individually at each county, and each county has a different situation. We're looking at the entire state of Maryland. And Maryland, for that metric, is very good. I think right now, well, we just looked it up, it's at 3, and we're in green or low risk until we get up to 10 in that one. And then the other metric is the percentage of people at the given event or training location who are fully vaccinated. We will talk a bit about vaccination a little bit more further on down the slides. But Ryan, why don't you go ahead and give us the next slide. So here's a very simplified categorization. Those of you who joined us maybe last year, was much more complex. We are right now in this low risk category, which again is either we have 10 or fewer cases per 100,000. And again, Maryland right now, it has 3. And it's one of the best situations in the state. Or we have 80% of our participants at a given activity or event are fully vaccinated. Should we fall either above that 10 per 100,000 or not have 80% fully vaccinated, then we could potentially move over to the moderate risk. But note, it has to be both of those. If either of the ones that are listed there in green are the case, then we are in that green, in that low risk category. And in that situation, we basically follow the whatever the local regulations are for event size and such, and whether it says risk mitigation, that gets into masking and so on down the line. So if the state of Maryland or wherever we're hosting, because that's where that would come into play if a county, let's say, has a different standard that's more restrictive than what the state has, we would apply to that, or for that matter, if a facility does. But also notice there, as we go over, if we did move into moderate risk, we're still able to do that. We have followed local regulations, but we may have to wear masks, may have some other things that are with that, and so on down the line. But we're in pretty good shape here, and such. So if you go to the next two slides give detail. We are not going to go through and read all of these. I did want to highlight what's in the low risk, and I very much encourage you to read the situations in the moderate risk and significant risk categories. I mean, there's always a possibility that we may shift over there. Again, numbers are looking really good right now, but we need to be attentive to that. So again, the size is based on whatever the local jurisdiction says, or the state says in that case. The additional forms that are necessary we have to have a communicable disease waiver. This is something that was introduced in March of this year, and it's required now for everyone who participates. It's a one-page waiver that talks about communicable diseases and such. It is different. If you were involved in any of our programs that were in person prior to March, there was a different form that no longer applies. That was called an acknowledgement of risk and such. The CDW, or communicable disease waiver, is much more legalese and such there. That is required across the board. It's good for 3 years, and it is something that is likely to be with us going forward, even after everything is done with the pandemic. It's likely to be a permanent component. In terms of on-site screening, that is not necessary. We certainly do encourage you as coaches to be tracking attendance and keeping a list of who is there. That's just good coach protocol, or a coach practicing. But there's no need in green to do any kind of screening that's there. We do encourage also, though, having some signage and reminders about hand washing and so on down the line. If you look across there, even if we're in moderate risk, the screening is all verbal, but we don't have to do temperature checks at that point. If there is, of course, on the next row, if there is, of course, a positive COVID test, that person does need to remove him or herself from the program for at least 10 days, with 7 days not having any symptoms. And of course, if it's an athlete or unified partner, they would need to get a medical clearance before returning to sport with that. For masking, down below that is, we're following local restrictions. Right now in Maryland, there is no mask requirement. If they are not fully vaccinated, then they should be wearing their mask when they aren't involved in exercise. So when they're lifting or training in your training program, or at the competitions when they're going through, even if they're not fully vaccinated, they don't have to wear a mask. They can if they wish. Even the fully vaccinated folks can if they wish. But if they're not, then when they're done their competition, they should take and put their mask on. That said, with vaccinations, we are, and we'll talk a bit more about tracking them, but we are not getting into an enforcement mode. So we are not going to be going around and kicking somebody out because they chose not to wear their mask. It is the standard that if they're not fully vaccinated, they should be wearing it during when they're not participating in exercise. But we are not going to be, again, going through and doing any kind of enforcement activity for that. Let's go to the next slide. Just a couple more components here. So social distancing, when we're at low risk, there's not an issue with that. I mean, it's encouraged, but it's not required there. When we do get to moderate risk, there may be some, that's where it does kick into play, and that may have an effect if we ever get into that yellow category for powerlifting. So it may be the ability to use free weights would be probably limited or removed there, because you wouldn't be able to spot. But again, we're optimistic that we will be fine for that. Transportation, what we're talking about here is when we say Special Olympics provided transportation, we're talking about anything that Special Olympics arranges or coordinates or provides. So, and this would happen, say, if your program gets a bus to transport folks to a competition, or if you are arranging carpools. If the athletes or family members do that on their own, that's not Special Olympics coordinated. But if you as the coach are coordinating that, then this does apply. And the bottom line with that is you can have one person in each seat, so it's not any kind of distancing within the vehicle. And notice that carries all the way across all the different categories there. However, if it is Special Olympics provided or arranged transportation, everyone in the vehicle would need to be wearing a mask for that. So for accommodations, that's for hotels and such, if there's any, or overnight lodging, which is possible in the fall, you can see what's there. Bottom line is if they're fully vaccinated, you can have up to 4 people in the room. Of course, our general housing policy requires 1 bed per person, but if one person is unvaccinated, they can only room with either one other person who is vaccinated, or people from their own household, which may or may not be family members. Sometimes many of our athletes don't live with their family; they're living independently. So probably is not going to kick in for much for powerlifting, but it's there should you need it or need to find it. For spectators, there's no restrictions other than whatever the local authority has, and then meals, really no restrictions there until if we ever shift over into the moderate risk category. Basically, they're encouraging staggering the meal times to not crowd too many people in, but it's not a mandatory thing. Let's go. I think this next is the last slide. Yeah. So vaccinations or vaccines. At this point in time, we are not tracking or collecting that information. Also, it is not and cannot be a requirement for participation. If someone is not vaccinated, they still can participate. Again, they may need to follow the masking situation that we described before, of wearing their mask whenever they aren't engaged in exercise. But you are not, we are not, no one in Special Olympics is in a position to say, sorry, you don't have a vaccine, you can't participate in this sport. There is a possibility that we may collect and track vaccine information. If we do that, it is strictly for the purpose of things that you saw in that grid, which would be the overnight housing. So again, for winter and summer games, we provide housing as an example. When we're setting up the housing list, we need to know who is vaccinated and who isn't, so we can follow that protocol there. Or if your area is providing housing for a trip that you're doing, they would need to know that. The other purpose would be for tracking and seeing where we are with that 80% of the participants being vaccinated. One of the things that we found is for many of our athletes, this is just a guess, but based on various conversations, probably a higher percentage of our athletes have been vaccinated than the general population. So it's quite possible that we may be at that 80% already. But if we are collecting that information, it will solely be for that purpose. We will not be segregating athletes. We won't be putting special markers on their name tags or anything along those lines. Also, if you're part of that collection or you're privy to that information, it's not their vaccine status is not something that you can share outside of Special Olympics. So, and again, just repeating there, it can't affect who's registered and who's not, or whether they're on a waiting list if there's a limited number of participants there. So that, in somewhat of a nutshell, is the entire protocol. So it's not an hour for me to fill you in on stuff this time. But before we move on with the next stuff, any questions or any clarification needed? I think it's much more straightforward than the much more detailed protocol when we first came out. So kudos to Special Olympics International for putting this together that way. Okay, seeing no questions, I'm going to go ahead and mute, and Ryan, it's all yours.
Yep, there's no questions in the chat, Mike. Thank you very much. So as a reminder, like we state before each webinar, when the season begins here, there's no athlete or partner that may participate in any manner, which includes practices, virtual practices, or competitions without a valid and current medical form, the CDW, like Mike was just talking about, and or the volunteer application necessary for volunteer certifications. There are no exceptions to this policy. On the coach's resource page, which I will also include on the email I send out, which will include the recording along with the PowerPoint here. It is a, I believe, monthly updated certification list where you can scroll through alphabetically your name and check where you stand, or along with other coaches. And if anything needs to be updated and you're not sure how to do so, reach out to me and I'd be happy to help you get that straightened out. So here's our powerlifting sports management team. Jim Downs, he's a coach from Montgomery County. Kathy Barrett, who coaches with Howard County. Dan Zotarelli, the coach for the Upper Shore. Kenneth Long is an athlete from Howard County. Derek Willis, who's on the call tonight also. Our newest addition, he's a powerlifting director. And then myself, Special Olympics Maryland sports lead. So this is just a reminder to work with your area leadership. Coaches should work with the representative well in advance of the start of the season to make sure that all your athletes have their forms in. If they do not, then they cannot participate. And that, again, needs to be before the start of the first practice. So please start double checking all of that now if you have not already, just so they have time to get in and get their medical forms into us so we can update in GMS so they're all set to go. So here's what is required for each participant. All around the board, for athletes, they need to have the athlete medical form. Anybody needs to have the communicable disease waiver. That CDW is what that's referring to. Outside of the athletes, everybody needs to have a volunteer application and screening, no matter what level of volunteer or coach that you are. Moving up the realms here, we have protective behavior certification for everybody also. Once you get to the sport volunteer, you need to have your concussion certification. That will go through sport volunteers, assistant coaches, and the head coaches. What separates them from the assistant coaches and the head coaches will be that specific sport certification. So like we're talking about in a few slides from now, we'll have our powerlifting coaches training a few weeks from now. So if you are intending to be an assistant coach or head coach or are one of those, I would encourage you to attend that to gain some more knowledge specifically about the sport of powerlifting and some general reminders there. Those need to be recertified every 3 years. Deadlines that are important. So please have all your athletes registered into GMS by August 30th. At that point, if they are not in, they are not eligible for the state competition. The last date for missing forms to be submitted. So for the CDWs, those need to be valid through October 16th, along with the athlete medicals there. For volunteers, they need to have their CDW along with their protective behaviors through this date of Fall Sports Festival, which is October 16th there. The competition registration deadline will be October 1st. So at that point, everybody who's attending must be entered into GMS so we can start getting everybody division and set up for the state championship. So the powerlifting events that we currently offer is the bench press, the deadlift, and then the combination, which is the bench press and the deadlift together. An athlete is required to complete both of those because the athlete's final score is calculated by adding those two together. So as a reminder, 3 unsuccessful attempts in any of these lifts will automatically eliminate the lifter from a combination event. As Derek, I'm sure we'll talk about shortly, it's better to start with a lighter lift just so you're not failing at the start, but I will let the sports professional in that talk about that shortly. So qualifying competitions, the point of that is to get everybody up and running and prepared for the state competition. Powerlifting is a little bit different than other sports, and we recognize that in a competition, you pretty much blow out everything that you have. So These are more guidelines at this point, but please continue to practice throughout the whole season. But I would encourage you to have one competition just so you're getting used to what it's like, having the athletes go in the order or mock order, if you would say it that way, and give them a break and then have them go through their second lift, kind of like the competition will be set up. When you have those, please have appropriately trained certified judges and officials, spotters there, medical personnel. If you need somebody and don't have a go-to person for that, reach out to me and I'd be happy to provide you with one. Please just notify me in advance of when that qualifier is going to be, just so I can reach out to them like anybody else. The more time in advance that somebody has, makes it better for everyone involved. And please have that sanction form submitted to myself directly in advance, just so I can notify other counties if they would like to attend, if there's room in your training gym for them. And then we can get as many people as we can there on that date. So qualifying for the state tournament, we talked about what's required to attend, along with the deadlines there that need to be followed. All coaches must have their certification requirements by the specific deadline. That includes head coaches. And again, one sanctioned qualifying event, please, before the state competition. That is the minimum, but again, I understand that powerlifting is very different than other sports in that aspect. So the point is just to have your athletes training, provide them that competition atmosphere, even if it's within your training, just so they can get used to what that competition is going to be like at Fall Sports Festival, so they don't show up and it's something out of what they're used to practicing in. So as of now, I have not received any sanction qualifying forms for this year. Is there anybody on this call? I know we don't have too many, but is there anybody on here currently that has an idea about when they would be hosting their qualifiers, just so we could get that written down in pencil at this point? All right, no problem. I know we're having this webinar a little bit earlier than we typically do, just to get everybody up to date. Kind of wanted to get you the guidelines out in advance here. But when you do have those dates and times solidified, please send me that sanction form. I will include that again on the email that goes out tomorrow, just so you have that. And again, if it's your first time filling that out, let me know. I can help you. I'll walk you through it. Our pre-competition webinar, just so you have it well in advance here, is going to be October 7th at 7 p.m. That'll run roughly 45 minutes to an hour, as will this one. That is the registration link listed below, which will allow you to sign up for it once the slide deck's distributed. We did cover this before already. Again, no matter who you are, that communicable disease waiver needs to be submitted. So our coaches training date, still working with Derek here on figuring out what exactly all the details are to it. But I believe we're talking about August 12th at this point, which is a Thursday. It's going to be kind of both a virtual and in person, but it will be held in person. So Chip Holquist, who lives down south, has been doing coaches trainings all across the world. Actually, he's doing one in Australia, as far as I know, along with a bunch throughout the country here. He came up in 2019 and led a great training that everybody truly enjoyed. So he will be leading the virtual portion of that. We'll have like a classroom or something like a screen set up in a gym. And then Derek will lead the instruction portion in person on August 12th there. So we're still trying to figure out the time, location. As soon as I'm aware of when that is, or where that is, I mean, we will send that out to you. Please sign up. It'll be a Survey Monkey, a really quick survey, just so we can capture anything specific that you want to learn from that training. That's something that we like to try to add to each training, so it's not the same reminders and content. If you have any questions or want to learn something new that hasn't been presented, that's the time to type that into that portion of the comment box at the end of the survey. So Fall Sports Festival, that's the culminating event for powerlifting, which happens at Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, Maryland. We've had that for multiple years there. That will be on Saturday, October 16th this year. Typically, it runs from 8 to 4 p.m. I believe we were done a little bit before then last year, but that may run later. All depends on how many athletes we have, along with a lot of other details, as it's powerlifting. So please make sure your submissions are in kilograms. I believe there was a county or two last year that sent them in pounds because either they forgot or they just got mixed up. Most likely this year, even though it adds a little bit more of email going back and forth between everybody, once you submit your athletes along with what they're lifting, I will probably send an email back and saying, just confirming this is in kilograms. And then all you need to say is yes, please. So that would just help a lot of details preparing for the competition and on site that day. It'll make the day go a lot smoother, not having to convert all those over. So if I do that extra ask, please don't feel like I'm intentionally trying to bother you. I'm just trying to make the day go as smooth as possible there. So we follow the USAPL officials are there on event day, and some more details will come with the pre-competition webinar, along with anything important that pops up before then, which you'll be informed about over email. So at this point, I will pass it over to Derek. I'm very thankful to have here. He's our powerlifting specialist. I kind of do the work behind the scenes, and when it comes to specific powerlifting information, I'm thankful to have Derek here. So I'll allow him to introduce himself, and then I'll join you back in a little bit. On to you, Derek. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. So you just want me to kind of go over the rules, basically?
Yeah, correct. Yep.
All right, so powerlifting is pretty straightforward, especially since we don't have the squat in our competitions at this point. It's going to be bench press and deadlift, and you get 3 attempts at each of the 2 lifts. And you're going to go in descending or lowest weight to highest weight in ascending order for each attempt. So if you were the second person to lift on your first attempt, you might not be the second person to lift on the third attempt. So the rest times may vary depending on how heavy you went compared to other people. So rules are pretty straightforward. Like Ryan alluded to, when you pick your attempts, you don't want to bomb out on your first or second attempt. You want to save it till the end. So good rule of thumb that I like to use is pick something that you can easily do for 5 on your first attempt, then something that you can easily do for 3 on your second, and then your max effort on your last rep. So we'll get into more of that at the at the coaches training in August too. But basically, you know, the rules, like Ryan said, they don't change. Bench press, you're going to unrack the bar, wait for the command to lower or to start, bring the bar down to your chest, wait for the command to press, extend your arms all the way up to the top, wait for the command to rack, and then you're going to rack it. Really, the only thing that gets people is not waiting for the commands or moving your feet or lifting your butt. Those are the big 3 things that people need to work on in their training. And again, we'll go over that in more detail, things you can do to help with that with your setup in the coach's training. Deadlift, same thing. There's going to be 2 commands. There's going to be a start and then a down once you fully lock out the weight. The things that get people in the deadlift is not waiting for the commands. And it's called hitching, where you rebend your legs or rest the bar on your thighs and kind of hitch the weight up your quads. So, I mean, look, rules-wise, really straightforward compared to a lot of other sports. As Ryan said, we don't really have a lot of competitions compared to other sports because this is more taxing on your body. So you don't want to do 10 or 12 competitions throughout the year. What I usually recommend for powerlifting is 2 to 3 competitions a year. That gives you a good, 12 to 16 weeks per competition to train. I do recommend that people train at least somewhat for powerlifting all year round if that's your goal, and it will help with other sports. I know a lot of the Special Olympics athletes do multiple sports. There isn't a single sport out there where being stronger isn't going to help you. So I highly recommend that if you don't have a lot of athletes in your county that do powerlifting, you start pounding them, trying to get them into powerlifting. Let's grow this sport, and it'll help all your other sports too. 16 chalk. Yeah, chalk. Going through these rules here. 16, that's an obvious one. The chalk is a big thing. it gets everywhere. It gets in your lungs, kind of hard to breathe. So when you chalk your hands, you want to chalk just the palm of your hands. I like wrapping my thumbs in the chalk, so it helps with the grip of the bar. Other than that, the only other place I'd recommend putting chalk, maybe on your upper back, if you have a problem with the bar sliding down, or on squats when you're training, or if your shoulders tend to slide on the bench when you're benching. Other than that, you shouldn't really. You'll see a lot of people sticking their hands in a chalk bowl, clapping their hands, getting a chalk cloud everywhere. It's really obnoxious. Nobody likes it. Only one coach at a time on the lifting platform. That it can get confusing for the judges if they can't get a good view of the athlete where the bar is touching their chest or anything like that. The 1 minute. So once the bar is loaded, the head judge will say, bar is ready. At that point, you have 1 minute to start trying to lift the weight or to unrack it from the bench. Pretty simple. If the weight is dropped, that goes with the rules. You can't drop the weight on the deadlift. You have to control it all the way down. We don't own the floors. We just rent them. So uniform. Yeah, there's nothing sexy about powerlifting. You're going to be in a singlet with knee socks and baby powder usually. So undershirt is required. Yep, briefs. So foot gear, socks. Yes, socks for the deadlift. You have to have knee length socks. I've been at powerlifting meets where someone cut their shin on the bar. Their feet were wide enough that the knurled part of the barbell was on their shins, and it cut their shin. This competition stopped for an hour while somebody had to go find bleach for the bar. So we don't want that. So everybody make sure you have knee socks on meet day. Excuse me, wraps, whatever you really require, honestly. Chalk, baby powder. If anybody's unsure what that means, it's just regular talcum powder. You put it on your thighs and shins for the deadlift. It helps the bar slide up your legs easier. No oil or grease. That was a thing in the 70s and 80s, and it was a horrible mess. So, lifting belt optional. I usually have one or two. Sorry, Ryan. I usually have one or two in my car at all times when I go to these competitions. It's recommended that you purchase and have one for your own athlete because there's a fitting issue. If all athletes are different sizes, belts come in different sizes. If your belt doesn't fit right, you might as well not even wear one. But if you know how to use it and you train with it properly, they do help tremendously. Okay, next slide, please.
Yeah, the next is going to go into some code of conduct specifically for coaches. Before we move on here, is there any questions specifically to powerlifting at this time?
Yeah, I had a few questions. I'll kind of go in reverse order here. So for the belt, are there any limitations to the type of belt, size of belt?
Yeah. Basically, it has to be the same width all the way around. So you can't have one of those belts that is thin in the front and then bulges out in the back. No padding on the back of the belt.
Okay.
And I know there's a whole bunch of different kinds of belts now. You have Velcro, lever, all that kind of stuff. We just simple 1 or 2 prong.
Okay.
So no Velcro belts.
Okay. And as long as it's just the 4 inches or whatever the standard width. Okay.
Yeah, leather, not the nylon.
Roger. Okay. In terms of the competition, so I'm new coordinator for Howard County. Are the athletes grouped by weight classes, and then are they grouped into, I guess, groups for competition?
The way it works is like you'll have bench press, first attempt, second attempt, third attempt for one flight, and this is dependent about how many athletes there are. But it'll typically go, let's say there's 40 athletes competing. The 1 through 15 will from the lightest weight lifted to the heaviest weight lifted. So they don't go in order of weight class, but they're scored in order of weight class. They go in order of weight lifted first attempt, weight lifted second attempt. So like I said, the order can vary from flight or from attempt to attempt.
Okay.
But yeah, for in order of lifting, weight class doesn't really matter. It's just weight lifted. But then your scoring is you only get placed in your weight class.
Okay, very good. And then for submitting weights, are these just openers, or do we have to submit all three planned?
Ahead of time, you would only have to submit your opener.
Okay,
And that's just so everybody has the order to start off with. And then after your first lift, you typically have, I want to say, a minute. So you complete your lift, judge says rack, they rack the bar, you get up off the bench, you go over to the judge, you have a minute to tell them your second attempt. The purpose of that is it gives them time to rearrange the list for the second attempt. So there's a lot of coordination and things that people don't, fully realize. That's part of powerlifting on the judges' side.
okay. And then for our qualifying events, you mentioned qualified judges for those? Do we have to submit any kind of paperwork beforehand, or are we just looking at people who can, I guess, judge the lift well?
I think if you submit what competition you're going to Ryan, he'll be able to validate the judges. But typically, if it's a USAPL event or any kind of I don't know if they officially recognize any other federations for the special Olympics. If you go to a USAPL event, I don't think you should have a problem. Again, as long as you submit it to Ryan beforehand and say, hey, is this good?
Okay. Well, I think we were trying to do a qualifier. I think they do a qualifier within Howard County.
Okay.
We've typically organized one in the past, but I didn't know where they got judges from.
Yeah, that should be good if it's already, something that is that's been happening in the past. So, but yeah, check with Ryan, just double check with that. But I think that should be good.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Javier, welcome aboard, by the way. It's good to have you here. Moving on here, I'm not going to read through all this. There are 3 different slides regarding coach of conduct. It all comes down to respecting each other and having a positive experience for the athletes and representing Special Olympics well, avoiding profanity, drugs, alcohol at practice and competitions. That would be the summary of all of it. We're here to serve the athletes, so please act professionally and take responsibility for your actions. If one of these is not addressed, I will reach out to you directly or say something to you at the event. We usually don't have any issues whatsoever, but it's kind of just to read through it and remind yourself what needs to be abided by. And again, it just comes down to respect for others and walking proudly in your walk here. Health and safety of the athletes, though, please ensure that the equipment that you're using is safe. You're following the rules and the training environments appropriate for the age and ability of the athlete. Recognizing when injuries may be occurring or about to occur, protecting the athlete in that sense. That's the summary of that there. So some resources that we always want to push out because they are extremely helpful. So each year we have our fall sports event guide along with any other sports that we have. It's the all-inclusive guide that talks about every detail pertaining to the day, even outside the sports, like summer games, for example, the dance times and everything else like that. That will be posted on the coach resource page, which you can see near the bottom there. So we have a coach resource page for each sport. And I'll include that link when I send out also. The powerlifting link is there. That's where you'll see any other upcoming qualifying competitions that other counties are hosting. That sanction form will also be included there. So you can see, okay, this county is allowing other counties to come because they have the space and facility for it. You also see the USPA website there to refer to with any questions, along with the International Powerlifting Federation website there. Do we have any questions at this time? All right, so we also have a resource kind of section at the end here that you'll be able to see when it's sent out. You can see on that screen there what it all includes. Again, this is more of a reference. If you have a question about anything or reminders, this is a great slide deck to refer back to, along with some copies that you might want to print out and keep in your binders again, with registration forms, procedures. There is sanction forms also included there that you can reference. So again, I just encourage you to check it out if you have any questions there. So at this time, I do not see anything else in chat. The best way to contact me, I'm not in the office all the time. I would encourage you to email me. My phone number is also on the staff page, but it would be 240-997-5269, the bottom of my email. If you don't hear back from me, please reach out again. I try to be really good about getting back to everybody within 24 hours. If it's something immediate, though, please call. Happy to help, no matter when you need it. So looking forward to more of a traditional year this year as opposed to last year. Really looking forward to working along with Derek and the rest of the great team that we have. Purchased some powerlifting equipment. So instead of renting it, we now have our own used but in great condition. So really looking forward to some great stuff with powerlifting here. So send your sanction forms in whenever you have them. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out. You will be updated if the return to activity information changes, like Mike mentioned. But again, contact with each other is important throughout the season just to make sure everything goes smoothly. So again, please do not hesitate to ask. That's why I'm here. I'm here to help.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, just to close out, again, thank you to everyone. But if the coaches could stay on for just maybe 2 minutes after you kill the recording, I had a question or request from an area to see if there's any either assistance or input folks can give.
Perfect. Will do. All right. So at this time, I'll stop the recording. If the coaches could stay on just for that portion, it'd be appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So it's not that it's secret or anything.